Okie dokie, everybody. We are now live. Now that I've figured out the new way that Instagram has shifted everything around. Strange, all this social media stuff. But we are here for the Astro-Babble, where I take 5 charts donated by you, the lovely followers, and we talk about what the signs and the planets and the houses all mean in context of the native's life, the native being the person that we're reading for, and we make some jokes along the way. We have a good time. It's fabulous. I'm so glad that you're here joining with me on Facebook and Instagram. Just as an FYI, if you would like to be a part of the live stream, feel free to private message me your birth date, birthplace, and exact birth time. That is what I need to run an accurate chart, and we will add you to the list. The list is rather long, so please be patient, but I will message you when your chart is featured. Also, I am a professional astrologer and I teach astrology, so if you would like to go deeper into your chart, or if you would like to learn astrology, you can always go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com. Okay, enough with the intros. Let's go ahead and pop open our first chart. Our first chart is going to be Cedar. Good morning. Cheers. I see you on Instagram already. Love that name, Cedar. Always love good plant and tree names. Let's take a peek, shall we? Well, that's interesting. Okay, I get it. So first and foremost, we need to understand your Sagittarius ascendant. So the Sagittarius ascendant is where you get this kind of spunky firework energy. It's where you get that that really charismatic nature. It's where you get that need to seek for the truth. It's where you get a lot of that somewhat reckless impulse, that great sense of humor, and also that twinkle in your eye that everybody is so fond of. However, this Sagittarius ascendant is applying to a conjunction with Jupiter in Sagittarius retrograde. So everybody in your generation will have Pluto in Sagittarius. It's a very slow-moving planet. It doesn't necessarily, it's not anything big or fancy. But when we have the ascendant applying towards Pluto, this is going to stamp Pluto's energy on the birth chart pretty hardcore. And Pluto is that underworld energy, that literal Hades energy. When we see Pluto so close to the ascendant, it's going to give both power, but also an extreme sense of death touch and fear and anxiety earlier in the life, until that power and that depth of kind of underworldness can really be channeled and harnessed for the highest good. As somebody who has Pluto very close to the ascendant myself, this is something that only people with Pluto on the ascendant really understand. Like, we're tapped into the world, and specifically through the underworld, through the subconscious, through the dream state, through the deep, dark richness of the earth. And things that are buried and dead and decaying. We're tapped into the world through those energies in such a profound way. But it can be a little bit hard to navigate at times. So that's where that comes from, is Pluto on the ascendant. The lord of the chart is Jupiter, but Jupiter is in his detriment of Capricorn in the second house of finance. Excuse me. So one of the things that we need to be aware of with this planetary formation is Jupiter in Capricorn naturally limits Jupiter's spark. Yeah. It's also been quite the hard financial time for you over the past year and a half, unless you've mastered being frugal already. If you've mastered being frugal, then it's been a little bit easier because it's familiar to you. But having Jupiter, the Lord of Abundance, in the second house of finance ruling the chart, it does indicate that money and wealth, specifically identifying with the poverty line, being something that will constantly kind of run rampant in the chart, because Jupiter is kind of steering the chart from the second house of wealth, but Jupiter's also in his weakest spot specifically. So coming to terms with the idea of wealth, with the idea of money, understanding how money works, but also understanding that money is not the root of all evil, nor is it the root of all pleasure. Yeah, that's something that we need to understand with this specific formation of Jupiter and Cap ruling the chart from the second. Moon in Aquarius in the third. I love this rush of creativity that you have, especially in the spoken and written arts. Um, I really do enjoy that to kind of offset the rest of the chart. I think that that's super fun. I think that that's a skill that should be leveraged pretty heavily. When in doubt, one of the things, whenever we see the moon in the third house, I always encourage my clients to keep a journal. Because what happens with the moon in the third is the emotions can really only be poured out onto the page. Or through speaking verbally to another person. So they can really only be, the emotions can only really be sorted when they're poured out onto the canvas of the blank page or another person's perspective. And so this is where you get your love for debate. This is where you get your love of kind of teaching and speaking and open mic poetry, but also your need to write things down. I highly suggest, if you don't already, have a daily journal practice, have a daily writing practice that will help you sort through your emotions infinitely so. Then we have this rather nasty pileup in the fourth house of family that I think is tied into the Lord of the chart, Jupiter being in the second house, which really brings forward the idea of financial poverty in the family, not just the self, and how do we break those karmic patterns around wealth, right? Because we have Mercury in Pisces, Mars in Pisces, Sun in Pisces, Saturn Pisces, all in the fourth house of family. And when we put the sun in the fourth house, it automatically brings an ego identification with the family in general. But Mercury, as the planet of the mind, being in his detriment of Pisces, really does start to mess with the mental trappings and the mental rule book that people tend to have. And where we see that mess up start to happen is the rules and the thoughts and the imprints that were given from the family to you. And those patterns specifically being wishy-washy, not necessarily being able to hold water, not being concrete ideals in the slightest, and you needing to remediate or overcome those thought patterns that have been kind of imposed upon you. Same thing for Mars being in Pisces. We don't like to see Mars, the warrior, in a water sign. Saturn also as Lord of Restriction in the watery sign of Pisces just makes a bunch of mud, which tends to like Saturn is normally about rules and regulations, but then you put him in the watery sign of Pisces and the boundaries start to blur, and it again goes to this idea of like, well, the focus is just nowhere. The family is completely just this amorphous blob on the floor trying to jellyfish their way through life and just catch whatever comes their way. And I think it's your karmic duty, your karmic debt, in order to pull out the family dynamic and really kind of shake it loose and then imprint new patterns and hobbies and habits that are actually successful long term. And one of the ways that you do that, the strongest planet of your chart coming through, the strength of your chart, the beauty of your chart, the real savior of your chart in this case is Our Lady Venus, she who is perpetually lovely and abundant. And you have Venus in Taurus in her home sign in the sixth house of work, health, and pets. Mwah, chef kiss, glorious, absolutely fabulous. I'm such a fan of this. And this is where we find your saving grace. This is where we find your ease. This is where we find your natural flow, yeah, is in the workhouse. Because that's really how we break through all of this attachment to family and bloodline and attachment to wealth, is by becoming an independent earner, and really understanding that, hey, there is a way that I can work out my problems and literally throw myself into a job or jobs in order to rectify this situation, in order to repair the poor habits and spending and savings, and really shift my mindset to understand what it means to be of service, but also what it means to earn a living. And then also that Venus is ruling your North Node in the 11th house of friendships, like surrounding yourself with new friendships and social circles that you meet through your work, and climbing that kind of corporate ladder, through the connections that you make, is just, it's such a beautiful success story of all of this stuff at the bottom of your chart just being old and coagulated and like stale blood that needs to be freshened and circulated and moved. Yeah, and the way that you do that is through your 6th house of work, pole vaulting into your 11th house of friendships and connections, and making that effort turn, making that straw turn into gold through sheer force of will, action, and effort. And I love that for you. I absolutely love that for you. I think that's really the crux of the chart. Like, we could go into other stuff, we could go into relationships, we could go into other things, but I think that that's the most important aspect of the chart to understand, because although relationships will come and go, the family drama and the financial stuff and your work life and the importance of that to rectify your long-term chart defects, like that's where your life should be focused, is earning that living, surrounding yourself with a new circle of friendships, and really pole vaulting into the you that you are becoming. Excellent. Thank you, Cedar. I appreciate you donating your chart very, very much. We will move on to chart number 2 from here. Let's just double check comments to make sure that we're not missing anybody. Nope, we are not missing anybody on that side. So let's go ahead. We'll move to chart number 2. Chart number 2 is going to be Fran, and absolutely hilarious. Again, it's just so fascinating to me when I read these charts, how one sign will carry over, one planetary formation will carry over into another, despite it being totally random. We have the same Venus, who was so strong in the last chart. This time it's Venus in Libra, but still Venus is coming forward into the ascendant of this chart just to kind of link the two together. I think it's super fun. Anyway, so in this chart, we have Venus in Libra, South Node, and a 29 degree ascendant in Libra. You're making me nervous, making me nervous. As an astrologer, I need to kind of re-emphasize again the idea of charts being time sensitive, and literally a couple minutes one way or another can often totally skew a chart. So, as an FYI, if you are not completely sure about your birth time, Fran, this reading may make no sense, because that 29 degree Libra ascendant, she's making me nervous. And that's something that's the flaw of astrology, is really we cannot operate without that birth time to the degree of accuracy that I like. There are other techniques and there are general readings that I can do, but as somebody with a certain amount of kind of ethical integrity in the work, I don't like to do general. I don't like to offer things up to chance or speculation. I really want to make sure that we're giving the most accurate reading possible. Okay, so we're reading this as if we have Libra ascendant. So we have Libra ascendant, we also have South Node in Libra and Venus in Libra. One of the things that we need to understand about this placement is the literal planet of beauty, the literal planet of adoration and love and all things that are abundant and sensual, is in the 1st house of self. And so being stamped or blessed with Venus is quite the claim. And her presence is very, very much a staple in your life, Fran, and that's something that I think is absolutely beautiful right off the bat to recognize. Having a Libra ascendant in general will give you some Venusian qualities, but to have Venus in her home sign in the 1st house, that's a whole new level of Venus that I think is just not just sugarcoating, but like dripping honey and dripping elegance and constantly surrounding you in an air of the finest perfumes. Like that is her grace. So that's lovely. You also have a fantastic moon in Taurus in the 8th. One of the things that I see a lot with a moon in Taurus in the 8th is somebody who is who a lot of people will ask me, Sam, can you tell if somebody is psychic, or can you, tell me if I have psychic skills by looking at my astrology chart? And I say, yes, we can talk about psychic skills with an astrology chart, but everybody's psychic skills manifest differently. And especially in this case, we have the eighth house of death, and memory, as well as finance. With the moon in Taurus. And one of the things that I've seen in the past with clients is people who are very financially intuitive, but also people who have a certain level of ability with psychometry, or the ability to touch objects and receive memory. Because Moon in Taurus is very tactile, and we see this a lot in self-care. People with Moon in Taurus constantly surround themselves in nature, bubble baths, pleasant scents, anything that would be ruled by Venus, good food, good drink, anything that really stimulates the senses will help to unpack the emotional heart of that moon in Taurus. But because we see the moon, the literal intuitive planet, in the eighth house of death and memory and finance, this is where we get that intuitive kind of vibe that there may be some financial psychic skills, as well as some psychometry skills, naturally imprinted on the chart. Let's see. Where else do we want to go from here? Speaking of finances, having Mercury in Scorpio, who, by the way, is currently retrograde, so there's some financial detective work that's happening in Fran's chart right now. In fact, that Mercury Cassini might be super close to that Mercury. That would be, yeah, some very, very strong financial revelations are happening in Fran's chart right now. Not necessarily good financial revelations either, but the idea that we currently have her natal placement, she's having a Mercury return of Mercury in Scorpio, in the second house of finance. That's bringing forward a lot of very interesting financial dynamics in her life and in her chart. So exposing financial fraud, exposing financial inconsistencies, really working with things that were said one way but turned out another, exposing lies. Very much the theme over the next couple weeks for you, Fran, as we delve into kind of that financial house for you. Ooh, I love a good exalted Mars. Exalted Mars in the fourth house. That's a fun family dynamic for sure. Having Mars exalted in Capricorn in the fourth house really does bring forward a driven strictness, and a very business-oriented attitude in the family. We can see the second house of finance. Where is Aries in the chart? Aries is in the seventh house of relationships. Meh. Oh, they're in mutual reception. Saturn and Mars. That's lovely. It wouldn't surprise me if if earlier in the life, especially, and throughout the life, spouses were introduced from the family to you, Fran, specifically because there was a good match. There was a match in social status. But yeah, that Mars, that planet of will, desire, and drive in Capricorn, the business-oriented sign, to put that in the family house, it really does bring forward a lot of very interesting tension, yeah, but also direction in the chart. Quick pause, question on Instagram about submitting your charts. Yes, you can submit your charts. Just private message me your birth date, place, and time. I will add you to the list. The list is long, so please be patient. Okay, and back to your chart. So one of the things that is interesting about your chart as well, Fran, is that you're actually here to learn about relationships. Having the North Node in Aries in the seventh house of relationships does indicate that, you're really here to master the idea of being in partnership. Yeah. And I like how efficient, the family dynamic was. The family was run as a business. And in some ways, having the Saturn in Aries retrograde and the Mars in Capricorn reception from your fourth house, fourth house of family to your seventh house of relationships. I think that this will carry over into your romantic life, because the level of structure that that provides is beautiful, is counterbalancing. But at the same time, we need to be aware that the spouse that you choose, the relationships that you choose, especially earlier on in life, will have a tendency to suppress your Venus, will have a tendency to suppress your natural qualities. And when we look at Venus being the strongest planet in your chart, besides that Mars, that Venus really wants to spread her grace, spread her beauty, spread her unconditional love. But the spouse that you may choose, or who may be presented to you, is all about conditional love, is all about understanding that love is about achievement, not necessarily about loving somebody for who they are regardless. And that can be somewhat of a curveball. So you mastering the dynamic between your idea of love and your spouse's idea of love is part of the fray, and counterbalancing that with your family's definition of love in terms of performance as well. That's why I think you've stamped yourself with such a strong Venus, so that you can play black sheep, so that you can, be the odd person out and present your ideas to the table in a calm and constructive way, knowing how much of this is actually your authentic voice. But in the truest fashion, present an opposition to the people who you hold closest and say, hey, I think you need to reconsider your idea of what love is. Right? Cool. Excellent. So that's that. Working in the health and wellness field, we see Jupiter in Virgo in the 12th house of hospitals, and therapy, and karmic healing, ruling the 6th house of work. So wouldn't surprise me if nursing or health and wellness is a big professional factor in your life. Finance also coming from social groups and friendships. One of the things that you'll find is the more you actually surround yourself with people, the more you surround yourself with groups and tribes that you specifically resonate with, the more your finances will increase. And that could be from financial gain that those people give you. So like, I hate to use this as an example, but it is a good example, like multi-level marketing. Like the more people that you have in your friendship circle, the more money you get. But it could also be just, the more you surround yourself and network socially, the more opportunities that you're given, because people are constantly on the lookout to support you and give you those opportunities. But again, the harsh side of your chart needs to be respected as well, and that's going to be that balance of family and relationship, authentic love. Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Fran, for donating your chart. Let's move to Alexandra. Alexandra, how are you? Let's take a peek. Oh. Okay. Damn. Okay. Here we go, Alexandra. We've got some stuff to talk about. So we have a Pisces ascendant, which is where you get not just your Pisces sun, but we have Pisces sun plus Pisces ascendant. So this technically makes you a double Pisces. Stamped twice with that watery, mutable, intuitive, very artistic, spiritual sign. Pisces, the image that I like to hold for Pisces in my head is the jellyfish. It's that creature that just floats through life, absorbing particles as they pass. It's that mutable water. Water requires a vessel to maintain a shape, and Pisces is that ocean. Like, it has no vessel. It just kind of is. It has its own tides and currents, but it's also just deep and wide and fathomless, right? And that's kind of that Pisces, that double Pisces energy, that super watery energy. And your moon in Sagittarius, like, we need to work on your boundaries, girl. We need to work on your boundaries for sure. Because having your three major placements of sun, moon, and ascendant all in mutable signs, that's going to bring forward some really sticky issues when it comes to playing by the rules, when it comes to taking advice from others, when it comes to keeping to a set schedule, when it comes to health and wellness routines. It really does bring a level of unpredictability to the chart that I don't think is super great. And this is where we need to kind of discuss your mind, your mental state, because we do have Mercury in the first house, Mercury in Pisces in the first house, and Mercury in Pisces combusts the sun in the first house. So Mercury, as the planet of the mind, brings the mind into focus in the first house. However, having Mercury in Pisces, the sign of his detriment, his least favorite sign, where his thoughts scatter into a million directions, kind of dissolved into the ocean of awareness, and then combust the sun, being overheated or overstimulated by the sun. That's where we get the mental lack of focus. That's where we get the inability to control the mind. That's where we get the thoughts that are literally all over the place. And the worst part is 3/4 of these thoughts are not yours, Alexandra. They are not yours. You are literally reaching through the walls, and tapping into and pulling in other people's thoughts. And that is the blessing and the curse of water signs. As a triple water sign myself, I get it. I totally get it. But we need to respect, again, the lack of boundaries here. You are not just a sponge. You are a super sponge. And that comes with its own set of drawbacks. So mastering psychic development, mastering the mind, mastering your ability to discern between what is yours, what is not yours, that's all stuff that we immediately find from the first house. Let's see, your need to be the center of attention is this moon in Sagittarius in the 10th. Not really a fan of that, but it does help you in your work environment, because you do look good in front of a camera, and you are emotionally prepared to kind of field questions and maintain that social role. You also have an intuitive, that the intuition in the public sector really does. If you learn how to master your words, then the intuitive aspect of how to answer questions in public, especially in front of a large group, that is a very valuable skill. But because that Jupiter in Leo is making a loose trine to that moon in Sagittarius in the 10th, between your 6th house of work and your 10th house of success, I like that placement. Let's see. We're on the 7th house of relationships. You're also just looking for somebody who you can chill with. You're also looking for somebody who's just as psychic as you are, somebody who understands what it means to constantly be in the heads and hearts of others. Because unless you find somebody who understands that plight, they're not gonna get it. And you have Virgo on the 7th house cusp, so finding a relationship with Virgo placements will also help to organize your ass, and that will be very helpful for your process. An exact sextile between Venus and Mars in the 4th and the 2nd house is so interesting. Using your family used finance as a way to prove love. Gift giving was the primary love language of your family dynamic, and that is both again kind of a blessing and a curse. But Venus in Aries is all about proving oneself. And you have that in the 2nd house of finance, making a sextile to Mars and Gemini, the ability to act in multiple directions and to, in some ways, overspend. And that Mars is ruling that Venus in the second house. So the idea of winning your favor with gifts, the family dynamic brings in your chart. So now we need to talk about this work thing and this health thing and how you take care of yourself. Because we have the strongest planet in your chart, which is this Saturn in Aquarius in the 12th. The Saturn in Aquarius is making a very strict opposition to retrograde Jupiter in the 6th house of work, health, and pets. I think that the more you start, and you're just about to get your Saturn return, actually. So cheers to that. December 19th, you're going to be starting quite the wild ride as you invest it. Like, I would highly suggest you find a therapist. I would highly suggest that you find self-care and self-help at this point, because you're about to get hit by Saturn in a very personal place. And it's about to throw you down through the 12th house of hospitalizations, which can manifest as physical transits to the body, and the nerves from an anxiety perspective, which will also kind of manifest as heart palpitations and swelling, if not checked before then. Then we also have the idea of, you feeling the need to flee, you feeling the need to retreat, you feel the need to just work on yourself. And that Saturn return is about to bring you face to face with the shadow, and really delve into some of the uncomfortable bits of your chart. But if you cut it off at the pass, and if you really start to surrender to Saturn now and say, I am willing to rewrite my code, like I am willing to change, and I am allowing myself to become the best version of me through the assistance of others and through the processes that I need to go through in order to ferment and alchemize myself. That's really what we need to be focused on over the next kind of year and a half for you, as kind of like long term as you go through that Saturn return. Excellent. Cool. Thank you, Alexandra. I appreciate your you donating your chart to the live stream. Let's go to Amanda. Amanda, my dear, how are you? Oh. Okay. So again, I love how we don't plan this. We don't plan this. But that Saturn in Aquarius that we literally just saw is the star of the show in this chart. I like can't make this up. Hilarious. So we have a Capricorn ruled chart here. We have the ascendant in Capricorn. Neptune and Uranus are exactly conjunct in the first house of self. That really does bring some interesting dynamics to the forefront of the chart in terms of psychic repression and breaking molds, the need to hide who you are, to hide your skills that seem otherworldly, but also the constant need to break the mold and shake things up, and to not play by the rules. It's a dichotomy, right? You're both suppressing and trying to break through that suppression at the same time. So Amanda, that's just tough luck. Capricorn ruled charts, people with Capricorn or Aquarius ascendant, I would also kind of put in this category, they have a rough start to the life, always. Saturn matures well. It does not do youth very well. And so when we see Capricorn or Aquarius on the ascendant, first 16 to 20 years of life, bullshit. Just total suckiness, awkward growth development, physical issues out the yin yang, low energy, feels like they're going to die, super stubborn, constantly trying to battle everyone else around them. Like it's really just a sucky first part of the life. But these charts do mature very well. Very well. So well that really anything beyond that point, and especially when the first Saturn return hits, like in this case, Amanda, you're also going to be coming up to your Saturn return over the next year and a half or so. So we have this beautiful maturation of the chart that's beginning, and I just think that it's flawless. And to have the ruler of your chart in the second house of finance really does make you very, very good with money. Now, there is weakness to that, and we'll talk about your friends and how they can be financial vampires in a second. But the idea of you specifically having a chart that will mature very well, especially financially, I love that for you. I love that for you. Let's see, where do we want to go from here? Yeah, we're going to have to tackle it eventually, so why not? So we have a Scorpio stellium. We have Jupiter in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, Pluto Scorpio, MC in Scorpio, all in the 11th house of friendships. Now, the tricky part is that Saturn is squaring loosely Venus at 21 degrees, and then it's applying to a square with Pluto at 25 degrees, and Saturn is at 24. So there is this conflict between finances and friends, and the idea of personal wealth and personal achievement, and you outgrowing your friends who are frankly stuck in their own bullshit. Now, there are pieces of you that will always have that level of bullshit that that this Scorpio stellium really represents. So let's talk about that. Because this is all Scorpio, the 11th house of friends and social groups and tribes, you are naturally drawn to the Gothic archetype in your groups and your friend structures. People who are a little bit more seedy, people who are a little bit more underworld, people who are a little bit more shadowy, shady. These people who constantly play the victim, these people who are holding secrets in their own heads, they are broken, they are damaged, they are festering. The grunge. Yeah, you like that grunge, that edge, that kind of dark and slightly poisonous energy in your friendship circles. However, Amanda, one of the things that we need to understand about your chart is that your chart is ruled by Capricorn and Saturn, my dear. And Saturn does not put up with bullshit. Saturn does not put up with bullshit. So as that Saturn gets stronger, all of your friends will become much weaker in your eyes. And it will be gradual, but the feeling will be there that you are outgrowing these people. You are outgrowing the reliance or the connection to this grunge. And part of it is because they're just not willing to do the work, right? And Saturn is very much all about doing the work. And this is also where you find your Sun in Sagittarius, and your Mars in Sagittarius, and your North Node in Sagittarius, and the 12th coming forward, is there is a really large piece of you that's focused on self-growth and self-development. And at one point, Sun in the 12th really doesn't bode well for self-esteem. But at the same time, when you start to realize that there's a difference between being plagued by lack of self-confidence and then almost wanting to be plagued by a lack of self-confidence, like your friends, that's the level that's not okay, right? Because they're surrendering to the cards that they've been given. You are trying to improve and exchange and level up the cards that you've been given. And that's really part of your mission here. Sun and Mars and Sag, as well as North Node and Sag, you'd be an excellent counselor. You'd be an excellent medical professional. You would be excellent to help other people through their own dark nights of the soul. And surrounding yourself with people, places, and things that naturally fit that profile, people who are going through that really, really hard time, that's fine. But you need to understand that you are not there to be one of them. You are there to help them. And that's a different vibe. It's a much different vibe. Yeah. So, as an FYI, that's just something to kind of be aware of. Now we also do have this exalted moon, moon in Taurus in the fifth, which is just delicious. It is opposing Jupiter, so again, the idea of friendships and tribes and socializations, opposing your natural moon, which really does thrive in a creative space. Like when you go out, you don't have the time to be creative. Yeah. Um, and then also, one of the things that we need to understand about this moon in Taurus, in the fifth specifically, it is a very fertile sign. It is a very fertile placement. And so kids are going to be very, very highlighted in your chart, whether you work with children or you have children of your own. A moon in Taurus in the fifth, that's some pretty powerful mother goddess energy that you're pulling through into your house of children and parenting. It's also, when you work with kids, you do get a certain level of emotional satisfaction, whether that's the metaphysical act of creation, like you working on hobbies and crafting and you know whatever your art is, or if that's the literal physical act of procreation. Either way, you're going to be tapping into your moon, and you're going to get a lot of emotional satisfaction through that. But the opposition is when you work on those endeavors, you trade your social life. But again, we've already gone over that your social life isn't as important as you think it is. It's meant to steer you in the direction of being the person who's helping instead of being one of the guys, or chicks, or one of the people who are not necessarily cut from the same cloth as you, but those who you are eventually supposed to serve. Okie dokie. Let's see. And we're going to our last chart, which is Brian. Brian is our last chart of the morning. Good morning, Brian. How are you? Oh, that's fun. Mm. Okay. Okay. I like it. Solid chart, Bri. Solid chart. So we have a Gemini ascendant. Gemini ascendant naturally is going to bring some of that mutable air energy. I'm actually going to be doing a video on Gemini later today for the Signs 101 series I'm doing on YouTube. So check that out, Brian, for more on your Gemini state. But when we have Gemini ascendant, it naturally brings forward the element of intellect, the idea that this person will naturally sort of be creative, mentally stimulating, a little bit of a chameleon, very much ranging the mental and emotional gambit. One minute they're high and mighty, the next minute they're low and sulking. That versatility, that flexibility, but always that mental curiosity really coming forward with Gemini. That makes the ruler of your chart Mercury in Aries, who is stationing in the 11th house of friendships. We were talking a lot about that in the previous chart. But because the Lord of your chart is in the 11th house, it does mean friendships are very, very important to you. It does bring forward the idea of philanthropy. It does bring forward the idea of community involvement, finding your tribe, and that being very, very important to who you are as a person. So just remember, when in doubt, go nourish your social circle to replenish and rejuvenate your essence. Well, that's interesting. You've put the Lord of your chart in the 11th house of social groups, which is a very extroverted placement, which works well with your ascendant. But then you've gone and put your North Node, the overall kind of life purpose point in the chart, down in your 4th house of family. I wonder why that is. Also ruled by Mercury. Fascinating. Maybe that's the strategy. The more social you are, the more you recognize that there are a bunch of superficial relationships that you can have and nurture that don't really take up a lot of energy, that are just, hey, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a while, and are really fun and energizing for that split second. But then as you start to explore social dynamics, you start to understand that there are people that you can pull close to you, and people who are a little bit more of a chosen family, and people who are very much about being the rocks in your life and really helping you to strengthen your foundation. And that's a big part of your life mission here, is to understand who those people are, and to nourish those connections and find those, superficial communities for sure, but those deeper families, those sankyas, I think I'm saying that right, those spiritual families, um, and to really make sure that you can, when needed, cloister yourself away with that elite group of people that you've chosen to kind of nourish your center. Sun in Pisces, Mars in Pisces in the 10th. Like, we just need to be a little bit careful, because Sun in 10th is a good placement, but the ego tends to get a little bit strong in the 10th. So when we get to this placement, especially with the financial aspect being so strong, I would highly caution you to understand that you being the center of attention is good for business. It is good for finance. But at the same time, you flaunting your Pisces qualities of spirituality, artistry, lack of boundaries, and your ability to absorb and assimilate and echo other people's information, and be a leader, but also be a spiritual leader. I think that that's also tricky to balance. Because again, the ego tends to get a little bit too inflamed. You've also put Mars here and the South Node here. Like, you're not here to become famous. You're here to build your tribe. That's the message. That's the meaning. Again, it's one thing to raise a community, but that community can make you feel empty if you don't have your people attached to it. So I would encourage you to, like, do your work, flaunt your skills, but then remember that it's not about them. It's about your core group, your coven, your tribe, your niche, your deeper family, and the bloodline that you establish within that smaller group. But because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, he is retrograde, but he's still exalted in Cancer in the second house of finance. Good for money, and ruling the 10th, so fame, bringing cash flow, like it is definitely part of the chart. Relationships also, bringing money, finding a spouse that is actually going to help with finance, and bring forward a good kind of financial chunk of change. The spouse that you're naturally attracted to is a little bit of an escape artist. Neptune and Sagittarius in the 7th does bring forward themes of being a little bit too slippery, and not necessarily conforming to the ideas of logic, but instead trying to escape through, at its worst, things like addictions, at its best, things like video games, or fantasy novels, or things like that. But the idea that the person that you're naturally attracted to does have that, what you think is spirituality on the surface, right, when it's really just a need to escape into something a little bit more magical, which is why they're attracted to you with all those Pisces placements. That ambiguity. But again, you're really looking for something a little bit more a lot more stable. So although primary relationships can be fun, and they can be nurturing, especially financially, it can be a good financial move for you to have a partnership. Just recognize that what you need spiritually, what you need in your life, is to find that foundation. And those rocks, those people that really help to ground you and really help to make you feel centered and focused and part of a routine and part of a structure, really. But the natural people that you're attracted to relationship-wise, they don't necessarily make you feel super structured unless it comes to finance. So that can be a little bit tricky to manage. The moon in Libra in the 5th, kids would be fun. But it doesn't necessarily need to be children of your own. You'd make a great uncle. The idea of that moon in Libra in the 5th, you constantly playing devil's advocate, constantly being fair and peaceful with children, with your creative process, really does bring a nice boost of creative energy into the chart for sure. Work never has a set schedule. Because of Uranus being in the 6th house, you're just going to have to deal with that. Part of that is going to be kind of entrepreneurship. As you leverage the stronger placement of your Saturn in Virgo instead of your Uranus in Scorpio, your Saturn in Virgo in the 4th house of family, ruling your 8th house of entrepreneurship. You do better in real estate. You do better working from home. As opposed to being on somebody else's clock, on somebody else's schedule, on somebody else's time. You will be famous for writing, teaching, and speaking. That is something that, again, kind of fits the profile of what we've already seen. Venus in Aquarius, the spiritual, the travel, the work with foreigners and an international audience. That's a beautiful combination with that Saturn ruling from the 4th. I like that. Oh, yeah. You do good to hold retreats overseas. That would be fun. It might not necessarily be a money maker for you, but it will nourish your own sense of spirituality and your kind of interconnection and reaching out to find those, again, those family units that your chart is so eagerly seeking. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. That is all we have to say about your chart. That was a lot, though. So let's go ahead and we will wrap it up for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. It's been another pleasure to read these charts for you. Remember, if you would like to submit your chart to the live stream, feel free to private message me your birth date, birthplace, and exact birth time. I will add you to the list. The list is rather long, so please be patient, but I will message you when your chart is featured so that you know when to tune in or watch the recording. All the recordings are on the YouTube channel, so if you search for ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website, it'll pop right up the channel, and you'll be able to see the old recordings, especially if you're interested in astrology. You can see me read different kinds of charts, and the visual charts are up there too, as well as some of the newer videos that I'm posting. If you would like to work with me one-on-one, and you would like to get your chart read and discuss what's in your chart a little bit more in depth, as well as learn astrology, you can always go to my website, click the consultations page for appointments, for the appointment requests, and the online classes page for what's coming up, like my class on planetary altars, which will be happening through Zoom on October 25th of 2020, or the recording if you're watching this late. So that is it. In the meantime, may the stars be ever in your favor.